really grateful to be here to see all of you and share some of my thoughts. This is actually, I haven't talked about research that much, just the idea of research on Scratch. So this is a great opportunity to talk about that. And I framed it as designing research. And often people talk about doing research, but it really is, research is always design. And I'm especially excited about research like the topics shared today and the research that a lot of you are sharing today that really supports young people as creators. And before I talk about how to do the research, I want to say a little bit about why. And I think, again, a lot of you are thinking about this as well, as just in today's rapidly changing world that people must continually come up with creative solutions to unexpected problems. And success isn't just like what you know or how much you know, but it's really your ability to think and act creatively and collaboratively. And this Mitchell Resnick, or most people call him Mitch, I often call him Mitchell, but we've worked together for many, many years. And I think this vision of why are we supporting young people as creators, it enriches their lives and it also helps them deal with the world today and in the future. So the work we've done together, we and others, grows out of, this was actually the first initiative I worked on in my career, was starting these computer clubhouses that have now grown into a network that this organization, the Clubhouse Network, leads. So it's really designing spaces for young people to be creators with their peers, working on projects in an environment of trust and respect that allows them to experiment. And there's clubhouses, 100 clubhouses now around the world, led by Gail Breslow and the team at the Clubhouse Network. So that experience, actually Scratch really grew out of the young people in these environments wanting to make interactive projects and wanting to learn to create with code. And we started building on previous languages, including Logo and other languages, developed a programming language for them to create and be able to express their ideas creatively, whether it's games, animation, building on their interests. And this is actually one of the first prototypes of Scratch that John Maloney and others on our team, we worked on. The block, for those of you familiar with Scratch, it used to say forward, which was from Logo, which we then changed to move because we had kids saying, how do I move it though? How do I move it? So I advocated for move instead of forward. But anyway, so some of the things were similar, but there were also real differences. So actually later in the year, it starts to look more like Scratch, puzzle pieces, the shapes, which suggest what can go together, and categories of blocks. The important part of this design, and there have been literally hundreds, maybe thousands of iterations of Scratch, and it was really working with young people. These are actually the first young people who ever created with Scratch with a prototype at the Computer Clubhouse Teen Summit, where kids were creating animation games. Actually, a couple of them said, how do we get our two things, like our two characters or sprites, together? And so we started to realize the need for making more collaborative features and how could you import sprites, remix each other's stuff. So it was really learning from what young people did with it, what they wanted to do. This was the first school class that I worked with actually in Minnesota, giving feedback, and I put on this little script because they were influential in, we had this block at the bottom that you see, if on edge, bounce. It doesn't really fit the grammar and the conditionals that we have, so we decided, but it makes it easy for an object to bounce at a nice angle. So we decided to take it out because it didn't really fit the grammar. And they noticed right away, they're like, wait, what happened to that block? We need that block. So we ended up, even though it's a little kludgy, we've kept it in. And this was the version that launched in 2007. This was one of the first projects. It was actually created by a family in multiple languages, a game. And an important part of launching Scratch, we didn't launch it until the community was also ready. Andres Monroy Hernandez and others in our group really saw the importance of the online community. And that's something that I've really learned more and more about. I at first was more focused on the programming language, and we said, okay, there's a space to share, but really, and you'll hear what I've learned about the online community and the importance of community, both in physical spaces like code clubs, coder dojos, schools, and clubhouses. Those physical spaces and communities important, as well as these online communities for sharing and peer learning. So Scratch is really itself a result of research. As I've said, it's been an iterative design process. So this creative learning spiral that Mitchell and I talk about, and where you're imagining, you're creating, you're experimenting, you're sharing, you're reflecting, and that gets you thinking of more things. That's both how young people engage, but also how we have developed Scratch itself as this research and design process. It also builds on research, decades of other research on learning that others have done, as well as us, on the model of learning. And this actually, the information delivery model is an older, more traditional style that people thought of learning primarily as pouring information. So this kind of funnel into the empty head information delivery. And you'll still see this often influences how people think. The immediate instinct of schools are closed, how do we deliver information to kids? And it's not to say that information can be important, but as the predominant way of learning, we know that learning sciences and a lot of our experience as educators know that the way that young people really become creators and engage in learning is through a more active process where they're engaged with the world, and they start this, I like this phrase of constructing working models in their head. It's not necessarily done. You're always building on your prior knowledge. And at first, when I saw this image, I thought it was a little scary. And I thought this child has their head open and they have 6 arms. But actually, it's grown on me because it really does convey a lot of information. It's from Lego Foundation, our colleagues there who have it in a booklet that you can download about learning through play. But what I realized about this image, so this child is building a model actively through engaging with the world, and it's both with low-tech blocks, hammer, nails, as well as there's like a little iPad in there, I think, or a tablet device. So there's both low-tech and high-tech. There's constructing, and that's the work that we do, this idea of learning through creating or constructing that builds on Seymour Papert's ideas about constructionism. A very important part, it's a little fade in the background, but it's other people of different ages are so important to the learning process. That social aspect of learning that we know is so important. And then I really like, there's also the natural world out the window. So there's a lot of things about this idea of constructing, and that you're creating in the world, and you're also creating ideas in your head that then get revised when something doesn't necessarily work the way that you thought. And then you either change that or you change the models in your head. So coming out of this, Seymour Papert wrote that the role of the teacher then is to create the conditions for invention rather than provide ready-made knowledge. And I was thinking about this, by extension, what does that mean for us as learning or educational researchers? Then if we really want to help young people be creators, a key role for us as educational researchers is to investigate the conditions that support creative learning. Like, what do we need in that environment? The peers, how do we create these environments that really help young people engage as and develop their ability to work collaboratively and come up with creative ideas and projects. So here's Scratch. This is the community this past week. And actually, if you look today, it looks a little different because April Fool's Day is a big day in the community, a playful day. You'll see the blocks look a little different for about 24 hours. They'll be a little surprised they have cat heads on some of the blocks, but it'll go back to normal. But a lot of young people, with so many schools around the world closed, a lot of young people are coming here, creating, sharing. And actually, one thing that's been really interesting for me is to see young people who we haven't seen in years come back to the site during this time. And I wanted to share with you about a couple of those young people, their stories. So one is Angelical. This was her first project years ago. It was actually not long after Scratch launched. And she said, it's my first game. She said, it's a simple game. I hope you enjoy it. You click on it and you can change the backdrop, the clothes, the hair color and other things. And here's the code. Each item in it, including the backdrop, has a simple script with just 2 blocks. When you click on it, it changes to the next image. Now that was her starting point. It's kind of amazing for me to look. If you look at the more than 30 projects she shared over almost a couple years of her real active participation, in a few months later, she had this virtual pet, a virtual pig, and you can give it water, food, you can drag stuff. I love if you get a chance to try it, the clean, it gets soapy bubbles all over its head. And if you look at the code, it's gone in just a few months to many more constructs. And there's conditionals, there's embedded loops, there's actually Boolean operators, and a lot of different things. And it's like the code works really well as well. But the thing that she was really engaged in was this idea of virtual pets. She actually later made a virtual dog that was very popular. She continued to come back to, around the same time, more like iteration, more versions of her dress-up game with more features. And actually, even almost a couple of years later, this was Dressmaker 2.0, a different sophisticated look with different options, but continuing to pursue that and build on those interests. And again, this is just some on her profile. You can see a lot of different projects she made, animations, tools for other people to use to paint, to build houses, all kinds of things over time. But we hadn't seen her in years and years. And she wrote to Mitchell just about a week and a half ago to say that she saw something that he had written that had a picture of actually the virtual pig project in it. And this is from her email, was saying, and she said that I could share this with you, that this is part of her letter saying, I'm from Singapore. I joined Scratch when I think I was 11 years old. The things I learned from using the platform and interacting with the community were really a vital part of my learning growing up. I'm immensely grateful for the skills that Scratch has helped me develop in childhood. And she went on to say that she had read some of the things he was talking about the goals of Scratch. And she said the skills, creative thinking, effective communication, iterative design are relevant to my career in architecture. So she's actually about to go get her master's in architecture. And she said she's actually using the programming skills to program 3D and explore architectural geometry. So I asked a little bit more about that when I asked, could I share this with you? And she said, definitely. And she shared with me some of the kinds of structures that she's been designing and collaborating as part of her internships in architectural firms and working. And this was one such structure. And she designed it using this language that I had vaguely heard of, but I didn't really know, Grasshopper. And she said that both the structure of it, and she tried to describe to me how it works, but then also just the process that she felt like she was able to pick it up easily. She said she felt like it was like deja vu, like I was coding in Scratch again, even though it looked very different to me. She said it encourages the same, let's see what happens when I do this attitude. So, so yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, sometimes I'm hearing some researchers say, well, when we look at kids' games, they often have a lot of sophisticated coding constructs or advanced things like these. And so maybe we should have all kids start by making games. And I guess I really want to say we designed Scratch to be, we talk about wide walls or a broad range of interests. And I feel like it was really important that she kept coming back to these themes of dress-up games. She started there. Yes, it wasn't a sophisticated start, but it was an engaging start that kept her going and kept her wanting to create. I want to talk about a different pathway from a different Scratcher that she popped up on my screen last week, and I was so excited because Rika Rose Roki and I had written a paper, which I'll mention later, where she was one of the people we interviewed to understand more about how kids get engaged and stay engaged. Like, what is it that where some of them get and really stay engaged in Scratch? And she was one of the people we interviewed to help us understand and really help me understand the community more. And her username is, and again, she gave permission to share Hello Yo, what's up? Which I'll just call her Hello Yo for short. But this was her first project, and it was a storytelling project based on a historical fiction series that she liked. And her code looked like this. It was storytelling, a lot of say and think blocks, telling the story. and sharing in the community. But what we learned from her, what she said was what really got her engaged was a few months later, she was exploring different things, but what really hooked her was this project she made. And she said the first thing that really started my experience in Scratch was when I made a coloring contest called the Blob Coloring Contest. She said, I have no artistic talent. I just put a circle on there and I said, hey, make something out of this. So this was the project that she shared. CC is, I learned, is from other Scratchers too, is coloring contests. We don't put contests on Scratch, but young people often make their own coloring contests or other contests for each other. And so she put it out there. She said, you can do anything with it, add music, accessories, make it into an animation, whatever you want, but just keep that line has to stay there. So, and she just had a little script that had music that just adds to the ambiance. So what happened was more than like dozens of young people did something with her circle. They took her up on her invitation in the community. So this one made it into a basketball. The circle became a basketball and it was an animation of a basketball going in a hoop. This is just another example of the circle became a head of a character and it had graphic effects going. And I want to just point out there's a couple blocks that are just stray down there. And sometimes I see that people talk about that as being a bad habit, that kids are leaving code that's not connected. But we actually designed Scratch to encourage this kind of tinkering. And to us, like there's a couple things that this shows that she was experimenting with like negative numbers with different kinds of effects. It also, when other kids go and see inside, they can say, oh, look at that, maybe I'll try that. So it suggests some ideas to them. So we see this as a positive thing, not necessarily, not a negative thing, even though it's not part of her running code, it's something that she was tinkering with and that she could continue and others could continue to play around with. Here's another example. The circle was a head that was interactive. You press keys and it moves around. You can change what it looks like and have it actually eat cookies at the end, which I like. And again, the coding looks really different for this one. And what she said when we interviewed her, and which this was 5 years ago, Rika Rose and I interviewed her, and she said, I encourage people to make it into a game, make it into elaborate art, make it into animation. And they did it. I was not expecting that at all. And I got seriously incredible talent. It was kind of crazy just to see all that creativity from just a circle. So it was really cool for us to hear the way she talks about the respect that she gained for others and how creative they were. She put out that invitation, but she didn't realize that so many people would do so many different things with it. And she also said that I met one of my best friends on Scratch through that. He's an amazing artist. I met so many people from that. So many of these people I still talk to. And this is, again, what helped me see, you know, it's not just a sharing site, but it really is. When people say community, I really have learned how much young people feel like it's a community. One of the next things that she talked about doing was this musical tournament. She had teams, she had rules, she had deadlines, but then she said, if you need another day, let me know. So she was managing all kinds of things. She actually has an incredible number of like more than 600 projects, and partly sometimes we see Scratchers as they get more involved, they have fewer projects. And what happens is some of them get very critical about which ones do they start curating more carefully. Like, I only want to put out these ones and my most recent ones. But I love seeing Hello, what's up? She has her whole range of projects from the very beginning till now, all kinds of different collaborations, animations, and celebrations, all kinds of things that she's been engaged with. There were so many it was hard to pick from, but I thought to share with you this initiative that she helped initiate and manage called Happy Scratchiversary, because she knew that she wasn't supposed to, her family had told her not to share her real birthday online. So she was trying to think what else could they celebrate? And on your profile, it sees how long have you been involved in Scratch, your anniversary. So she thought, let's celebrate each other's Scratchiversaries, when it's like if you've been on Scratch for a year, 2 years, and how to celebrate that. So she made this studio where you could share projects and make things. But beyond that, what was amazing was she started creating all these roles for people. So this was in the interview, she said, I think one of the good things to make people interested is I have different jobs available. They're monitors. So they're going to answer the questions, keep track, make sure there isn't anything that's reported that shouldn't be in the comments. And then they're gift givers. They're the ones actually making the gifts. And we've got the designers, and they decide the image, they made our mascot and our slogan, and we have advertisers who spread the word. So she's just managing all these different roles in the community, and just to hear the kinds of things she learned from that process about how to collaborate and how to help other people collaborate. Now, I said that I just last week saw that she had suddenly shared a project after years away, and it was called Random Acts of COVID Kindness. And she's suggesting that people make gifts for each other. She said, "Hi, Scratch, it's been a minute. It's been about 3 years since I last shared a project. 7 years since you joined. Social isolation due to the pandemic has given me the combination of free time, a desire to create something, and a need to spread kindness that brought me back here. So I have a little idea for a project where we can all work together to put smiles on one another's faces and have something to do while we hunker down. Let's spread some semi-random acts of kindness. Want to help? Use the arrow keys and I'll explain my idea." So she's suggesting that you suggest someone who you think could need cheering up, or you want to make a gift for, that other people could make a gift for. And she gives them ideas like maybe a game, could be a song, could be a playlist, could be a project, things to do while you're stuck. So she also said, like, encourage them to look to see what are their interests. So I love how it's not just like make one thing, but she's recognizing different people might have different interests. And when I asked her about this, she said, "Well, Scratch provided me a valuable creative outlet when I was younger, so it's no wonder I turned back here to try to spread a little kindness during such an uncertain time. I'm so grateful for the amazing community that you created." I feel like she's one of the real creators of the community, as well as our community team and our moderation team that keeps Scratch safe and works really hard around the clock to do that. So as I mentioned, the interview with her was part of interviewing a group of Scratchers who've been involved in the community, and just looking at their pathways. Even though they had different interests, many of them started by saying that the way they started either in school or outside of school was exploring, experimenting, trying things. And then it was feedback and positive response and connection from peers that kept them coming back, kept them engaged. They learned through collaboration, and then often they wanted to contribute back either on the site or in their communities, or both. Now, when I look at the research and I get alerts, and it's always so exciting to see the different kinds of research going on with Scratch and other coding and computing education. And there's a lot of researchers who've been using this tool that's freely available called Dr. Scratch. And I know there's a real demand for what people, one of the things people really like is you can just put in a Scratch project and it gives you a computational thinking score. And I can see the value of this. I also want to just raise some questions that I have about it, just helping people understand the limitations of it as well, because I don't always see that. Every tool has limitations, but it's often not necessarily mentioned or recognized. So I just wanted to point out. So this one is trying to encourage, it says you're at the beginning of a great adventure. There's a score of 7 out of 21 for coding, and there's relatively low scores, but if you see, this was actually the latest project shared by Mitch Resnick, who has a PhD in computer science, and he made this to generate backgrounds in Scratch. Here's the code. It actually works very well. There's nothing wrong with it, and you see he has a spare block out there too, where he was experimenting and also encouraging people to experiment. If you want to shift the color of it, you can do that. So the rating it's taking certain things into account. But what concerns me is that people might start to think that this means that, like, somebody doesn't know how to code, or that there's something a little bit wrong or missing. They might misunderstand it to mean that, when in fact there's nothing wrong in this code. It does what it's supposed to do, which is generate this backdrop. You can play with it. Here's another, like the project before that got a 15 out of 21. It says it's a masterful one. It still looks like, if I looked at this and if I didn't know, if I hadn't helped design some of these blocks, I might think, okay, but there's room for improvement. Well, what was that? This was a simulation that he recently made and invited people to remix to show what was the effect of staying home at the rate on the effect of staying home on the rate of infection spreading. So, and he actually said a lot of people suggested in the comments you could add different, way you didn't talk about, like all these other factors. and like this graph is generated and it invites you to change it. But he said he actually had more, it was more complicated than this, but then the main point got lost. So this idea of like, what are you really trying to express? He took away so that the main point of what's the value of staying home on the rate that something spreads came to the forefront. So again, like if I look at this, it looks like pretty complex code to me, and it really invites this experimenting both with the slider. We also invited people to remix it. But if you go back to this, it looks like, again, like, and I tried to see, well, wait, the data representation, it's really focused on that user interactivity. Why aren't those higher scores? And what I saw is actually to get data representation to a 3, you know, to the highest level, you'd have to use a list structure, and it only uses variables. But actually, he didn't need to use a list. So again, I just think as long as you know that, that's okay. But I feel like sometimes people might not realize that. Or user inactivity, to get a top score, you need to use some obscure blocks we put in about like using loudness and video sensing, which are cool features, but they're definitely not necessarily like best practices that you have to use those. They're just like another thing. And again, as long as people know that, but I'm afraid that sometimes it's used uncritically without realizing some of the limitations. So it only focuses on blocks and not on practices and strategies such as problem solving and debugging that we know is a key part of computational thinking. And I feel like is often the most important part, like, are you learning how to break a problem into parts, doing problem solving, debugging, or the ideas that are expressed in the project that are so important. It also assumes that every project should have as many complex coding structures as possible in order to get a top score. The scoring of some of the block categories are questionable, like I said, that you need to use certain constructs that aren't necessarily, I mean, you know, they're good, but that doesn't mean like you don't have to have a repeat until to have good code or to know, you know, have good logic. So, and that the feedback, I feel like may narrow the focus only onto like which blocks you're using rather than these broader creative collaborative skills. And again, to say, as long as you know this and you can actually click and see like what is it, so as long as you know these limitations and are noting those in the research or in the work, I think then, you know, I'm not as concerned, or it can be valuable, but again, I don't often see that. So I guess like, what am I suggesting to do? I'm really excited about research by us and others that focus on pathways of participation on time. So rather than just looking at one project and saying, what kind of computational thinking do we see? What is it over time? And then investigating the conditions, what are those conditions, and improving those conditions for creative learning. And I just want to share a few examples of this. Shyamindu Dasgupta, Benjamin Makelhill, and others have done research. This is actually quantitative research on young people's projects, and they looked at blocks. This one did look at blocks, but it was really looking at blocks repertoire or vocabulary and how is that expanding over time. And they've looked at this in a couple of different papers. This one was on remixing, like if you remix other people's projects, then later when you make your own projects, are kids picking up on concepts from those remixed projects? And they did find evidence that they were. But this idea that it's more like you're expanding your vocabulary over time rather than in this project did you use all these different constructs? Is it like, are you able to express yourself with this growing vocabulary? A totally different approach that I'm finding very intriguing on looking at blocks. Shruti Dhariwal, who's a graduate student, PhD student researcher, came up with this tool that she's written about recently, Block Art. And she invites it as, she's designed it for young people to discover the types of blocks you've used in your Scratch projects. And her idea is like, what are the different types? So you can type in, so I tried typing in, hello, your what's up's name to see, and it just generates for every single project, it makes a interesting graphical representation that's based on the types and the colors of blocks. So that's kind of her signature of all of the blocks she's used. You see that, you know, there's a lot of, like, for some of the projects, there's more purple, which is a lot of looks blocks. The ones that are more yellow, that's more events blocks, and the little remix symbol. And what you can do is you can go click on, like, what is that one there, which has that interesting shape. And the more sides to it means the more blocks that they've used. But it's not like a rating, it's just the idea is to be intriguing, like, oh, to see patterns and to get curious about like, oh, what are these different ones and why? Oh, those were my first couple of projects. And then I looked further, and these are some of her last projects. And you see there, I was very curious about this one that had a whole bunch of purple. And that was this animated multi-animator project where she invited and got lots of other young people to create animations to different parts of a song. It's a very popular way that young people collaborate, and she's helped organize and facilitate a lot of those collaborations. This other one I was curious about that looked a little different here was a tutorial. So anyway, it's just a different way to think about blocks, more like what are the patterns I see, and get curious about it, and maybe think, you could still think, oh, how could I do this thing with it? Another project that Shruti's worked on is called Scratch Memories, and that's really the idea, is to help children celebrate and reflect on their creative trajectories. To really get the spirit of it, it has, you put in your name and then this really playful, inviting, uplifting music plays. But in the interest of bandwidth, I'm just showing you, but it'll like welcome you. It talks about when you joined, and it starts helping you remember that first project you shared. What about that first project? Like not just what you did, but how you interact in the community. The first project you remixed, sign and remix if you're my friend. And then it talks about, look how other people have engaged. 107 Scratchers remixed this project, the sing-a-thon that she organized where different kids sang. And it again celebrates this trajectory or pathway from a project without a block, which was add your piece of a floor remix, to one with more than 1,000 blocks, which was this multi-animator project. It also celebrates you're now connected to over 1,000 Scratchers in 76 countries in the world. And so, and then like at the end, there's more to it, but those are just some examples of the kinds of things that it gets you reflecting on from here to there. And here's to 7 years of imagining, creating, and sharing. So it's not just talking about the blocks, but the whole way you've engaged in the community. And it encourages you to scratch on. And here are just some of the pictures from Shruti's, her master's thesis is really very colorful. I encourage reading it. And it talks about some of the young people's reactions and reflections. And you can see their faces as they're watching it. The girls on the left, one was thanking the other because she saw, oh, you're the one who first, favorited my project. Thank you so much. And just how surprised they were to see these things and how proud, and it really helped them reflect. Other researchers doing work that I think also really looks at both these pathways and the conditions is the work by Bridget Barron, Nicole Pinker, Caitlin Martin, and others for the Digital Youth Network. This book that I really love really documents young people's trajectories and conditions, being equity in coding and computing. And this is an example of a tool they use that they designed to be both useful for them as researchers, but also for the young people and the others in the community. And it shows across different sites, homeschool, after school, community, how young people over time using technology. And so this case study, Calvin, he played video games and computer games at home, you can see at the bottom, and did a little bit in school during elementary school, games and some Microsoft Office. Then suddenly, as part of the Digital Youth Network, in school and after school programs started creating different things using Scratch, using other game maker, video tools, and connections from home, school, and across. And at the top, you see who are the different teachers, community members, mentors, family members who were part of this process. It all came out of a lot of interviews and documentation. It was just like a different way to think about pathways and to think about the research. Another, when we're thinking about creating conditions and improving the conditions for kids as creators, here's an example of a recent report that came out from Drexel University by Brian Smith and others on making culture, and they studied and interviewed and observed in making culture in maker spaces, educational maker spaces, and here were some of the recommendations that came out of their interviews. So often when we see coding research, there's often a natural desire to think about how are kids using concepts, and I do think that's important, and I'm always interested in that, but this is just like a partial list. I I kept changing the slide because I'm like, oh, wait, what about, identities and interests and attitudes? So it's not all here, but it's just to give a sense of like this broader perspective of what we could be looking at and what a lot of you are already looking at. And again, I'm really excited that more and more of the research is looking broader. Yes, concept, but how else are they engaging and connecting around and using coding to express their ideas and to iterate and develop? So just overall, I want to say that I'm really encouraging this focus on pathways of participation over time is one of the things I'm really interested in. And how do we support multiple pathways, help document process, and design that encourages young people to reflect and share? It's both good for their own learning, and it's also for us to understand their thinking and learning. And then really looking at improving and investigating the conditions for creative learning, like we're designing, in each of these studies, you'll often read this really good research. You'll see they have some really good ideas in their method sections, like how did they set up the learning environment? Who did they have? Did they have coaches for teachers? And all kinds of things you can learn. So designing, observing, gathering feedback, iterating, and really improving. So I just want to say, Scratch is available for free, and thanks to our supporters and all the people working on the Scratch team and Lifelong Kindergarten that really have help make all this possible every day, and to Angelical and Heliotep for sharing their stories, and Raspberry Pi Foundation for hosting this. So I did want to invite any of you who want to participate to talk more about these ideas, because I know this is like a very quick, and there's a lot more to dive into and to discuss, and I'd love to get more of your thoughts. One way to do that is in our Learning Creative Learning online community and course. It's really a discussion area, as well as videos and other things, and we'll be actively, there's a new round where we'll be participating, and you can like scratch together, but as well as share broader ideas about creative learning. And you can go to LCL and sign up for free to join us in that discussion. And then here's my contact info.